This presentation is on Chapter 16 on the circulatory and the respiratory system. This presentation will provide you the information for you to begin completing the Chapter 16, 17, and 18 worksheet. Originally, I was going to provide this as one large presentation, but I decided to break it down into two separate presentations so it's easier to digest and it's easier to come back and revisit material. So we will do circulatory system first and then respiratory system. Before we get started, I want to go through vocab and mostly just focus on pronunciation so we know how to pronounce each of these words. So we'll go through these relatively quickly. First, plasma, hemoglobin, arteries, capillaries, veins, platelets, lymph, lymphocytes, blood pressure, congenital, anemia, leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, respiration, diaphragm, pharynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchitis, pneumonia, pleurisy, asthma, sinusitis, tuberculosis, and emphysema. Okay, now we're going to get into the circulatory system. So first, blood. Blood is the way that oxygen and nutrients are transported through the body and how waste is removed. The primary component of blood is plasma, which in this image is clear. It's everything that is around the red, white blood cells and the platelets. Plasma makes up roughly 55% of blood volume. Plasma is comprised of mostly water and is what blood flows in. Red blood cells make up 40% of blood volume and are responsible for transporting gases. Hemoglobin is a protein on red blood cells that oxygen attached to so that it can be transported to cells and tissue. Hemoglobin also transports carbon dioxide out of the body. So if you look at these red blood cells, notice how they're concave. This increases the surface area, which allows more oxygen molecules to attach to each red blood cell. Each red blood cell can contain 4 oxygen molecules on each side, so a total of 8 per red blood cell. White blood cells help protect the body from infection. When you get sick, the number of white blood cells increases and surround, ingest, and cause the disease-causing microbe to die and be removed from the body. Platelets, which are the smallest components, are sticky cells that stick to the edge of wounds, and as blood flows over the wound, the platelets stick together, building up and eventually closing the wound. The purpose of platelets is to prevent blood loss in the case of an injury. Now let's talk about how blood moves through the body. The blood moves through the body through vessels called arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. Arteries are large vessels which move blood away from the heart. Some important anatomy term is arteries. Arteries are always taking blood away from the heart. The blood moves through the arteries to increasingly smaller vessels. This helps maintain pressure, allows the heart to not have to work as hard. The next vessel is called an arteriole, which flows into the smallest of vessels called capillaries. So as you can see here, the artery, which means this is blood that is leaving the heart, moves to the arterioles, which are smaller, and spreads the blood throughout the body more effectively. And then we're to capillaries, which are the smallest type of vessels. Capillaries have 1-cell thick walls. This allows nutrients and gases to move across into the cell and waste to be moved out of body tissues and eventually out of the body. After the blood moves through the capillaries, it collects in venules, which then collect in the bigger veins. Another important anatomy term, veins always move blood towards the heart. So blood pressure. What is blood pressure? Blood pressure is important to know because this is how much pressure is being exerted on the exterior walls of the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. We talked about previously that the veins and vessels have an elastic component. If there's too much pressure, eventually the vessels lose that elastic component, making it so the heart has to work harder. So now let's look at how blood flows through the heart and through the remainder of the body. The blood first enters the heart through into the right atrium, through the superior and inferior vena cava. This is blood that is returning from circulating through the body and is deoxygenated, which means it has little oxygen and more carbon dioxide. So when the heart relaxes, the blood moves through a tricuspid valve down to the right ventricle. The heart then contracts, and the blood moves from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. If we think about what we learned on the last slide, artery means that blood is moving away from the heart. Now another anatomy term is pulmonary. Pulmonary means lungs. So this vessel moves blood away from the heart towards the lungs. The blood circles around the lungs, giving off carbon dioxide and collecting oxygen, and then returns to the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. When the heart relaxes, the blood moves from the left atrium down to the left ventricle. When the heart contracts, the blood moves to the aorta, which takes the blood to the rest of the body, starting the process all over again. I want to draw your attention to the thickness of the walls of the ventricles of the heart. This is what causes the blood to circulate. The strong contractions here allow blood to move throughout the whole body. Now I want to look at the different types of valves. I mentioned tricuspid valves earlier. So here's an image of tricuspid valves. So if we break down, tri means 3, so each valve has 3 flaps. Now these are one-way valves, so blood can only move in one direction. Otherwise, the pump of the heart would be less effective. If you have a defect or a failure of one of these flaps, it can cause what people call a heart murmur. We'll talk about that later. So this next slide shows, this is another video you can look that goes through the circulation of blood through the body and through the heart if you want to revisit that. You don't have to, but this is an option. Here is a picture of the circulation pattern through the body and how blood leaves the aorta and goes throughout the remainder of the body. Now for anatomy pictures, what you need to know is red vessels mean artery. So again, artery means that this is oxygenated blood going out to the rest of the tissue away from the heart. Blue signifies veins, which is deoxygenated blood coming back to the heart. Final part of the circulatory system is the lymphatic system. This is the system that makes up the body's immune system. First, we talk about lymph. This is the fluid that fills space around body's cells and is what lymphocytes travel through, similar to what plasma is to blood. Lymphocytes are specialized white blood cells that protect the body by attacking pathogens and providing the body with immunity. This is done with the use of 2 types of cells, B cells and T cells. B cells begin to multiply when they come into contact with a pathogen. Some of the B cells create plasma, which creates antibodies to attack the pathogen. Other B cells form memories, which provide immunity if a similar pathogen is encountered in the future. This is how vaccines work. Vaccines, they introduce a dead pathogen, the B cells attack it, create a memory, and so when that type of pathogen is encountered again, the immune system responds more quickly and is able to fight it off more easily. The other type of cell is a T cell. Now these are similar to B cells, but when they encounter a pathogen, they begin to enlarge and multiply. There are 2 different types of T cells, Killer T cells, which stop the spread of pathogens in the body by releasing toxins that destroy abnormal or infected cells. Helper T cells help to activate B cells and killer T cells to make it so there's more cells able to fight the infection. So if we think about when we talked about blood, is when we get sick, the white blood cells begin to multiply. Helper T cells makes that response happen more quickly, so we have more white blood cells available, so it's easier to attack pathogen and remove them from the body. The final part of the lymphatic system is the lymph nodes. They filter the lymph to remove destroyed cells and move them to the blood to be removed from the body. The two lymph nodes that most people know about are the ones under the jaw on both sides of the trachea. When you get sick, the lymph nodes have to filter more of the destroyed cells, making them work harder, and they also swell up. So we think about, we have lymph nodes here. We also have some in our armpits and down in the groin area. Now we need to address how to take care of the cardiovascular system. The first thing is you need to control what you eat. When you eat large amounts of saturated fats, they can begin to clog arteries, making the heart work harder, which can lead to various diseases. Also limit the amount of sodium consumed. Sodium levels are directly linked to fluid levels. When you consume large amounts of sodium, like in processed foods, your blood volume increases, and that can put more stress on the walls of blood vessels and the heart. You also need to stay at a healthy weight. The higher your weight is, the harder your heart has to work. And earlier in this semester, we talked about all the diseases linked to being overweight or obese. The next thing you can do is exercise, which when combined with a well-balanced diet can help you achieve a healthy weight. This also reduces stress, which will influence your blood pressure and your heart rate. Last, you want to avoid the use of tobacco, alcohol, and illegal drugs. The use of drugs can permanently damage tissue, and in adolescence, it can interfere with the development of organs and tissue. Next, we have a list of problems that you can experience in the cardiovascular system. First, blood pressure. Like mentioned before, when blood pressure is too high, it puts pressure on the walls of blood vessels, which doesn't allow them to stretch and relax as the heart beats, making the heart have to work harder. Second is heart defects. These can be anything from heart murmurs to holes in the heart. A congenital heart defect means it is present at birth. Next, we have cardiovascular disease, which is a collection of a bunch of conditions that can include hypertension, which can come from chronic high blood pressure, heart disease, and then also stroke. Heart murmur. This is a defect in one of the tricuspid valves. Now, we talked about tricuspid valves earlier. So a heart murmur is when one of these flaps is deformed or has failed, which results when the heart pumps. So we think about the heart, when the ventricle pumps to circulate blood throughout the body, this one-way valve now has a leak in it. So what happens is when this pumps, some blood will actually flow back up into the atrium. Next, varicose veins. So to explain varicose veins, I first need to explain how blood moves from the legs back to the heart. The heart is not strong enough to fight the high gravity from so far away. So the legs have one-way valves that cause blood to pool. So the heart pumps, blood comes up, and then it comes down and it pools in these one-way valves. If it wasn't for these, every time your heart pumped, blood would go up and blood would come and pool in the feet. A varicose vein is when one of these valves fails. This causes a higher amount of blood to be in one area, increasing the pressure, and it can cause the vein to stretch. This can be dangerous because the vein could eventually rupture. Next is anemia. This is a condition where the blood cannot effectively transport oxygen. This is usually due to an iron deficiency or loss of blood. So monthly menstruating women, men after surgeries, or both genders after bouts of continuous high intensity exercise can suffer from anemia. To combat this, like mentioned in Chapter 5, increased iron intake can have a large influence. Next is leukemia. Leukemia is a cancer which will affect any of the white blood cells. These cells are abnormal and do not function properly, and this significantly influences the effectiveness of the immune system. It can also lead to an overproduction of abnormal cells, which can decrease the body's ability to create red blood cells and platelets. And finally, hemophilia. This is a condition where the blood will not clot, which will lead to easy bruising and a high risk of excessive blood loss when any cut injury is experienced. Now let's talk about lymphatic system. So immune deficiency. This is when the body can no longer fight off infection. These conditions can be congenital, which means present at birth, or they be contracted through another person. The most common version of this is HIV, which is an immune deficiency that decreases the number of T cells, making it harder to fight off infections. So we think about our T cells, they enlarge and they kill pathogens. As that number goes down, we can't fight off pathogens as well. Now, HIV progresses to AIDS when the T cell count drops below 200, where a healthy level is between 500 and 1500. So as this disease progresses, it makes it so what normally would be considered a simple infection to fight off, like a cold, can be deadly because the body has a lower capacity to kill off pathogens. Then we have Hodgkin's disease or Hodgkin's lymphoma. This is a cancer of the lymphatic system. Then we have tonsillitis. This is when there's infection in the tonsils. Now, the tonsils we'll talk about in the next section when we talk about respiratory system. But the tonsils help clean the air that is breathed in through the mouth. When these are infected a lot, they may have to be removed. This usually happens in children more than adults.